There is a huge shift in the small businesses in many of our electorates, I'm sure, to home-based businesses, whether that's a direct business or a consultancy service, and these people are increasingly frustrated by the telecommunications infrastructure that services them. We have got at Coalcliff a new mobile base station being established, and I've written to the Minister seeking more detail on what that will actually provide in its time frame. I acknowledge the Minister is meeting with my constituents this week, and I am particularly asking him to give a very serious consideration to their extensive concerns.
Time has expired. The time allotted for this debate has expired, and the debate is adjourned, and the resumption of the debate will be made in order of the day for the next sitting. I call the clerk.
Private members' business. Notice number 1, the member for Shortland to move motion relating to Lyme disease.
The member for Shortland.
I move the motion relating to Lyme disease in the terms in which it appears on the notice paper.
I call the member for Shortland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Lyme disease is an infectious disease caused by bacteria carried and spread by ticks. This is a disease that does not receive the acknowledgement or recognition in Australia that it should. Mr Deputy Speaker, the disease is becoming a global epidemic and is currently affecting the lives of thousands of Australians and many within the electorate of Shortland. Lyme's disease can be caused by a bite of an infectious tick, and there is a growing body of evidence, and this adds to it, that the point of transmission can also be transmitted by fleas, mosquitoes, transplantally from the mother to the fetus and through unprotected sex. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, Lyme disease is a disease that's having an impact on many Australians, and it may mimic other diseases. Many Australians with Lyme spend years in the Australian medical system being misdiagnosed while the pathogens infect their body, and they have a chance to propagate and cause damage. It's really important to be able to identify Lyme disease early and then deal with it. Australians are getting sick from tick bites in an acquired local and federal state governments are refusing to acknowledge the Lyme pathogens. Australian medical practitioners are not telling patients that were bitten by fleas in Australia that their symptoms could possibly be Lyme disease. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, a recent study by the Murdoch University, announced in late June this year, found that Lyme pathogens in Australian ticks. So that supports a growing number of historic studies that have found pathogens in Australia. So governments have denied that Lyme disease is in ticks in Australia, but this research has shown that it does exist. And Lyme disease can be eradicated if the affected person takes antibiotics for a prescribed period as soon as possible after they're bitten. By not acknowledging and not treating Australians with Lyme disease, it's causing an enormous impact. And one constituent wrote to me, GPs don't know symptoms to look for and never, if rarely, refer us to infectious diseases. If we present to emergency, our basic blood works look normal. It's unfortunate enough to see infectious disease. They roll their eyes and say no Lyme's in Australia. They get ridiculed and humiliated, and current Australian pathology isn't broad enough. There's no use promoting a free hospital service. This is what a Lyme post has said, if they can't get the support that they need. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know that over a long period of time this has been debated, but pathology tests must change. Doctors must learn more about Lyme disease, and I believe this is an that we need to deal with Lyme disease and think of how we dealt with HIV and AIDS in the beginning, and this could be similar to that. Now, people are travelling overseas to get treatment and have been misdiagnosed. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about an email I received from a constituent who was a public service working for the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service, and she contacted the disease through her work. And she was one of 7 National Park and Wildlife Service staff that have succumbed to the disease. And she's current, and one of her colleagues, Natalie Young, was medically retired from the New South Wales Public Wildlife Service, and because of the disability she suffered. She won her appeal in Workers' Compensation Commission, which recognised the fact that her illness was caused by a bite from a tick by Lyme disease. Now, the constituent that wrote to me said that she counts herself lucky because her treatment costs have been paid for by her employer and are being supported by her workplace. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd have to conclude by saying that I'm disappointed that no one from the other side is speaking on this, and I say that not in political terms. I have been contacted by Sharon Whiteman from the Lyme Disease Association in Australia. I know she has been contacting members on the other side of the House, and she has told me that the National Party is championing this for her. Why aren't they here speaking on the motion?
I thank the member for moving this motion. And is there a seconder?
I second the motion.
Okay. The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call the member for Throsby.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the member for Shortland. I know she's been a champion on this issue, and I know, Deputy Speaker, were you not in the chair, you'd probably take the opportunity to speak on this motion as well. As the chair of the House Health Committee, you were very agreeable to the proposition that was put before that committee, without giving anything improper away, to the committee holding a roundtable of experts and interested advocate patient groups into the existence of Lyme disease in Australia. And I'm pleased to say, as I'm sure the member for Shortland said, that on the 18th of September in Parliament House we'll be conducting such a round table. And I think that's an important opportunity to shine a bit more light on what's going on here. The Lyme disease is an infection transmitted by the bite of ticks, we know that. And the ticks particularly, which are carrying the Borrelia burgdorferi bacteria. The effects of the infection can be long-term and disabling unless they're treated, and they're treated quickly, typically with a course of antibiotics. The name incidentally derives its name from the town in Connecticut where the disease was first discovered in 1975. Members of the House might be interested to know that. It's also present in many other areas, temperate regions across the globe, including in Europe, in Canada and North Asia, where a wide variety of the Borrelia bacteria exist. Several species, Deputy Speaker, of the Ixodes tick, I'll say that again, Ixodes tick have been distributed and have been discovered throughout these countries and in North America as well. And we know that this particular type of tick also exists in Australia. I'll have more to say about discoveries of and the incidence of this disease in Australia. As the member for Shortland has pointed out, there is quite some contention about whether the bacteria exists in a native form here in Australia. But what there's no contention about is whether the disease actually exists and whether there are people in Australia who have contracted the disease. Absolutely no contention about that. And indeed, the capacity for them to get the sort of clinical attention and treatment that they need is in fact being undermined by the lack of certainty within the medical and scientific community about the existence of this bacterium and the ticks which bear it, which then goes on to influence the most appropriate forms of clinical practice and the distribution of knowledge around that most appropriate forms of practice. Critics and patient advocates argue, Deputy Speaker, that the Borrelia does exist here, and they are very critical of what they call a flawed 20-year-old study, which has pointed the other way. They say that there is evidence to suggest that the tick which bears the bacteria does exist here in Australia, and indeed gain some heart from a recent study which found the existence of a Borrelia-type bacteria within a native tick, which was extracted from an echidna. They say that points to unequivocal evidence that the bacteria is in existence here in Australia. Can I talk about government action to date? In 2012, there was a clinical advisory committee on Lyme disease, which was established to look at evidence around Lyme disease. It was asked to provide advice on the extent of the disease in Australia, best practice diagnostic testing, and the most appropriate forms of treatment. Deputy Speaker, the call first met in March 2013 and agreed on the need for further research. However, there were many different views on the committee, and the committee was unfortunately disbanded in July 2014. We don't know why. We don't know why it was disbanded, and indeed the establishment of a health committee roundtable, getting all of the people who have an interest, together with some of the members from that call involved, may shed some light onto why this committee, which was charged by the federal government, was disbanded, and how we can take this issue forward. Deputy Speaker, in the time remaining to me, I think it behoves all of us as parliamentarians not to substitute our knowledge for those of the medical and scientific experts, but it does behove us to shine a light on where we think there are gaps in our knowledge, and it is certainly true that the things that we focus on are also the things that the community and our scientists and medical experts will focus on. I commend the motion to the House.
I thank the member for Throsby. The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Yes, Mr Deputy Speaker. I seek leave to make further contribution to this debate without closing it, and in do so I acknowledge the Lions Association that's here in the gallery today.
Is leave granted?
Deputy Speaker, given the member for Shortland's intense interest in this matter, which I respect, leave is granted.
Thank the opposition for the government for allowing the mover to speak with the speaker who was supposed to be here being absent, but I'd like to personally thank the government whip here for allowing this member to move this motion again.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to give my personal thanks to the member for Bass, because this is Lyme disease is a disease that has impacted on the lives of many Australians. And
I now call the member for Shortland.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would like to start my contribution by thanking the member for Bass for his generosity in allowing me to speak again to this private member's motion. It's really important that Lyme disease is recognised in Australia. It's really important because it's having an effect on so many people throughout the nation. I know in Shortland electorate, I've been contacted by at least 20 people that have been impacted, whose lives have been impacted on by Lyme disease. And I'd like to also thank the Lyme Association for the extra information that they've provided me with. And I'd like to acknowledge that May was Lyme Project Month, something I didn't do in my original contribution to this debate. And Mr Deputy Speaker, I think I'm really pleased that the Health Committee has agreed to have a round table on the 18th of September in Sydney. I think we'll get a lot of information that will lead to this debate being taken forward. As the member for Throsby said, I know that you'd be here speaking on this debate if you weren't in this chair, because you're passionate about all issues that are health, and I know that when we look at the issue, we will actually get a complete understanding. Now, I visited one family, and the mother had been living with Lyme's for quite some time, and she was unable to do the most basic day-to-day things. Her husband showed me the cabinet with all her medicines in it, the medicines that she had to take on a daily basis. She was taking up to 20 medicines a day at a time. and they had a small business, and he was trying to continue with his small business without her input into their business. The children in the family had taken on the caring role. There was very, very little that this constituent could do because of the impact that it had on her life. I've been contacted by mums that have children that have Lyme disease. I've been contacted by other constituents who have told me about the trauma that they experience when they turn up at an accident and emergency department only to be told that there's nothing wrong. The misdiagnoses that take place really cause enormous hardship and problems for the person. And it's not only the physical aspects of living with Lyme that is a problem, it's also the psychological aspects that are associated with it, because not being able to perform your roles that you've performed over a long period of time, not being able to work, which has a financial impact upon a person's life and a family, not being able to enjoy the things that everybody has the expectation that they'll be able to enjoy. And added to that, the simple fact that with the misdiagnosis, we've been told that you've got motor neurone disease and how you have to adjust to that, being told you have Parkinson's disease, and then finding that those diseases aren't progressing, finding that the symptoms have changed, and then finally finding a doctor that takes you seriously, understands and knows about Lyme disease, and then being able to have the right sort of test to determine whether or not you have Lyme disease or the rubella. Yes, and quite often the only way that a successful diagnosis will be made is if the pathology test is undertaken overseas. Pathology in Australia doesn't get to the issue, doesn't look at it properly. We need to really recognise that the Borrelia infection does exist, that it is transferred by ticks, and understand that it is having an enormous impact on a number of Australians' lives.
The member's time has expired, and I thank the member for their contributions. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the presence of the Lyme Disease Association guests here in the chamber, and would encourage them to continue their fight and to look at some outcomes from the adhesive arachniditis inquiry we held, which has furthered the cause of that particular issue as well. There being no further speakers, the debate is adjourned and the resumption of the debate will be made an order of the day for the next sitting. I call the clerk.
Private members' business, order of the day number 2, free trade agreements, resumption of debate on the motion moved by the member for Bass.
I call the member for Bass.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I seek leave to speak again without closing the debate.
Is leave granted? I call the member for Bass.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to once again highlight the trifecta of mutually beneficial free trade agreements concluded by the Abbott government. And I've spoken many times before of the huge benefits of these free trade deals for my home state of Tasmania in particular. And that's because free trade, more trade, means new markets, new investments and more jobs across the entire economy. But I regret to inform the House, Deputy Speaker, that not everyone thinks that way.